if you read the scriptures, you see in Psalm 19 that God's voice is heard through creation. Romans 1, creation reveals God so that humanity is without excuse. My guest that I'm about to bring on, President and Chief Operating Officer at the Institute for Creation Research, Dr. Randy Guliuzza. We'll get the right pronunciation of his last name, but just to hear a little about his background, he is an MD from University of Minnesota. He was the 28th Bomb Wing Fight Surgeon and Chief of Aerospace in the Air Force, has a master's in public health from Harvard, Bachelor of Science in Engineering from the South Dakota School of Mines and Technology, registered professional engineer, Bachelor of Arts in Theology from Moody Bible Institute, author of a number of books, including Made in His Image, Examining the Complexities of the Human Body, Clearly Seeing, Constructing Solid Arguments for Design, 5 Minutes with a Darwinist, and 20 Evolutionary Blunders, among other books. So great delight to have Randy with us. Thanks so much for joining us today on The Line of Fire.
Well, thank you so very much for the invitation.
And how do we pronounce your last name correctly?
Well, you were really, really close. It's Randy Guliuzza.
Guliuzza. All right. I didn't know if the I got pronounced there. Okay. Well, Dr. Guliuzza, Randy, thank you for joining us today. Let me just step back and ask a large question. There has been the perception for years now that the more science you know, the less faith you'll have. The more you study science, the more you realize the Bible can't be true and notion of an intelligent creator can't be true. And my perception as an outsider has been the opposite, that the more you study science, especially in recent decades, the more these things point to an intelligent designer and the God of the Bible. Am I right in thinking that way?
Oh, you're absolutely right. In fact, I don't know where that lie got started, that faith and science were in some kind of conflict, but the reality is, and you mentioned those verses earlier, Psalm 19 and Romans chapter 1, which are totally true, that the creation does declare the glory of God, but even more important, it says, and shows his handiwork. And the verse in Romans chapter 1 says, for the invisible things of God from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. Now, that word made is very interesting. In the Greek, it is used only one other time in the New Testament, in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10, where it says, we are his workmanship created in Christ Jesus. So your intuition is right on. Through his handiwork and his workmanship in creation, it is revealing things about us and revealing things about God. And what we really see, the more we dig down and the deeper we drill biologically, from the organism level all the way down to the molecular level, we see incredible systems that work together for a purpose. We see many, many places where you have dozens and dozens of multiple parts working together for a purpose. And the more we study, the more we realize that there had to be not just a designer, but a genius engineer behind everything.
So would it be something like you come down for breakfast in the morning, there's no one in the house, and you see that the breakfast cereal has spilled, but it's spilled with a message that goes from one end of your house to the other, detailed information of everything happening in the stock markets that day that is being reported in the newspaper that afternoon. It's 30 feet long, wrapped around your house. That would be an insignificant and unworthy comparison, say, of human DNA, and the idea, well, it just happened. The box just spilled like that. Would that be a picture painted in the right direction, but woefully inadequate?
Yes, that paints the picture well for a couple of reasons. One, you mentioned that it's kind of just spilled out and all over the floor. The whole idea that things are spilled or happen randomly is pushed for a purpose, and it's pushed in colleges and high schools and things for a purpose. And the purpose is really an anti-design or an anti-designer purpose. And that is because engineers, and I'm an engineer, we don't do things without a purpose. We design for a purpose, and the purpose is always to solve a problem. So engineers operate for a purpose, and when I went to medical school, I found out that physicians operate for a purpose. So anybody who wants to accomplish something does it for a purpose. So if you want to push an anti-design or anti-designer agenda, you will argue strongly that there is no purpose and things happen randomly. And so that whole idea of something spilling out is pushed for that idea to just push back against the idea of random. But the second thing you said is also right on target, that you would have this line of letters which would be detailing the stock market and all these other things. And it's still woefully inadequate, because what you actually have in the DNA is all the information to build that organism. And I'm talking about every chemical, every compound, every system is all in that information. And it is an astounding amount of information just in the DNA molecule itself. And now we know multiple levels of information, not just the staggering amount of information in the DNA, but there's a level of information actually above the DNA. There's markers on the DNA which control regulation of the DNA. That's called epigenetic information. And then even the architecture, the shape of the chromosomes themselves contain a level of information. And then there's another level of information just in the cell, the way things are arranged in the cell. It's like if I could see your office right now, the way the lights are arranged and the switches on the wall and your chair and desk, how those are arranged in and of themselves is also sending information. So you have just layer upon layer of information in the cell. So as you said, even in the very first question, the more you look at this and you see these layers, the more you would not have less faith, the more you would have incredible faith that this great creator that we serve can hear your prayers, can do things, can operate and act supernaturally.
Mm. And at what point does a human being receive its DNA coding?
Right at the moment of conception. That's, you get the DNA from mom and dad, so a human being has one half of their chromosomal repertoire from mom. And then the moment that sperm fertilize that egg, and then the two membranes will fuse. So the sperm will only human sperm will fertilize a human egg. It will latch onto a specific receptor molecule on the outside of the egg, and actually the sperm will home in on that receptor molecule. When it latches onto that, that will preempt any other sperm from fertilizing that egg. There's multiple mechanisms which stop multiple fertilization. The membrane of the sperm will fuse with the membrane of the egg. Tiny little microfibrils from inside the egg will develop very, very rapidly, reach out, grab the nucleus, which is dad's contribution of DNA from the sperm, bring it inside the egg. The chromosomes will align at that time, and that's when fertilization has taken place. And that is the very first cell with the DNA repertoire, not a potential human being, but a real human being.
A real human being with programming that is far more complex than our most detailed computer programming. And at the moment of conception, so I mean, what does evolution say to that? It would be one thing if evolutionary scientists had no clue about this. They didn't know about DNA. They didn't know about epigenetics. They didn't know about RNA. They didn't know about, as it's been called, the signature of the cell and so on. But they know these things. How do they explain them away?
Well, they do not explain them away. That's the important point. They want to explain them away, but if you were to really seriously look at the literature, the evolutionary literature, and try to find a detailed explanation from an evolutionary perspective of how just sexual reproduction evolved, you're not going to find it. There is not a detailed explanation out there in the literature. And if someone has a detailed explanation of actually how that, I'd love to have them send me the paper, because it's not out there. There are stories and there are speculations that are out there, and they're taught with the force and effect as if they were fact, but they're really not. But if you're looking for a well-documented, biologically plausible, and scientifically valid step-by-step explanation of even how sexual reproduction evolved, it's not out there. It's just not in the literature because nobody knows how that could happen. And the fact of the matter is that sexual reproduction, whether it's human sexual reproduction or any of the other creatures, is so incredibly complicated. So incredibly complicated that you cannot really document how this could happen. And in fact, if we had a whole hour, I could just go through some human reproduction, you would be blown away and you would say it's a miracle that anybody is even born to get everything to work together just right to bring about a human being.
Mm. So I read about more and more scientists, from geologists to biologists to chemists, who have abandoned Darwinian evolution for various reasons. And yet you read about the suppression of their views as if there's really a stronghold, an academic stronghold, ideological stronghold that says thou shalt not dissent. We've got about a minute before the break, but does that really exist in the academic world, or is that just some conspiracy theory?
No, that's not a conspiracy theory. It's not that thou shalt not dissent, but thou shalt not dissent publicly, and thou shalt not dissent in a way that a lot of people can hear it.
Mm.
You can dissent among yourselves, but the whole idea, and this is not a conspiracy theory, it's that you must keep your dissents relatively private. You can be heated in your dissent amongst yourselves. You can be very vocal amongst themselves in their dissent. And as you mentioned, there is a vocal dissent. But what you shall not do is let the public know to any degree the extent of the dissent and the depth of the dissent. That is what you shall not do.
Very interesting. And obviously there is the academia that has built itself around Darwinian evolution. My guest, Randy Guliuzza, Dr. Randy Guliuzza, President and COO at the Institute for Creation Research. We come back, we'll direct you to that website, find out what's there. And then I want to ask some of the larger questions. We've been kind of focusing on the micro. I want to talk about some of the macro questions with Dr. Guliuzza. And yeah, I wish I had about 10 hours to sit here and ask questions. Speaking with creation science expert Dr. Randy Guliuzza of the Institute for Christian Research, ICR. Randy, how can folks find the website, and what material will they find when they get there?
Well, our website is really easy to find. It's ICR.org. ICR stands for Institute for Creation Research.org. So ICR.org. And on our webpage, it is just a treasure trove of answers to questions. That's what really we offer. Christians got questions. Pastors have questions. They're hearing things from National Geographic, Discovery, Nova every day. Things are piling in from school, at high school, college. And you're going to have questions. You can't be listening carefully and attentively to what's happening in school and not have some questions. So if you go to ICR.org, you'll find over 14,000 articles on covering all different kinds of topics, everything from cosmology, how we see, starlight in a short period of time, and particularly in the area of geology and biology. We just specialize in those two areas particularly. And increasingly, we're getting more and more articles on our webpage that are dealing specifically with the design that we see in living things and how we can explain biology, not from a Darwinian perspective, but from a thoroughly design-based perspective. And we like to call it an organism-focused, design-based perspective, which is radically different than what you're going to hear from Darwinian evolution. It's not tweaking it. It's not reforming it. It's rejecting it altogether and coming up with a better explanation. All
right, friends, ICR.org. And to this moment, kids in school are having questions raised, losing faith over issues like this, right through college, university. So to know there are scientifically factual, accurate answers that are there, that's a lifeline. It's not just information, it's a spiritual lifeline. So Randy, I've seen videos that will go like multiply 5 times and larger, or 50, until you're looking at the universe, starting in, where you are in your backyard, and then smaller. And we've been talking about DNA and microorganisms and things like that. So it's almost like you get to something that's so small, you could fit 100 of them on a human hair. And when you multiply it and go on this little factory and the people waving, like giving you the thumbs up, it's like, oh my, you can't believe that there's so much complexity when you get that small. You've touched on that some, but what about the large picture, the picture of the Creator from the heavens, from the universe? Expand on that for us.
Well, your analogy of a lifeline is right on target right there. And really, when you go down at the small level that you started out at, what I really see at the small level is the genius of the Lord Jesus Christ as our Creator. I just see incredible genius in terms of design and getting everything to work together precisely for a purpose. When I expand out to the really large scale, the heavens, Psalm 19:1 is really on target. The heavens declare the glory of God. And when I am looking at that area, what I am seeing is His infinity, his vastness, and his all those omni attributes that we have him, his omnipotence, his omnipresence, that he's out there in all of that, and of course his omniscience, which is really, really highlighted in the biological realm. So in one realm, I see genius, I see creativity, I see those kinds of things. At the other realm, I see power, I see just this unlimited, almost mind-boggling in scale that you have to comprehend the Lord Jesus.
Yeah, and I love the way of contrasting those images, because depending on what you're focusing on, you get a different aspect of who God is. So over the years, you've obviously studied with people who are not believers, and then you're engaged in the literature from people who are critiquing, raising points. What would you say is the strongest argument, or one of the strongest arguments you've heard that has thrown Christians and troubled them? Does that have to do with Genesis 1? Is there something else that comes up? The age of the human race, fossil evidence? What comes up? Either the most challenging or the most common objection, and how do we handle that?
Well, actually, I think there's two that are the strongest one. One of them is really only strong because of the common sense factor, and that the question is, how can so many scientists be wrong? That's hard for a lot of people to understand. It's like, wow, there's tens and thousands of these scientists. Can they all be wrong? Are they all duped? Have they all bought into some conspiracy theory? Do they all hate religion or something like that? And so the question is, how can they all be wrong? The answer to that is they really don't know anybody else's field, and therefore they're really only taught in one worldview, and that is the evolutionary worldview, and that is reinforced through two ways. One, there's peer pressure. You don't want to be the person who doesn't go along with the crowd, even in the scientific community. And two, it gets reinforced, I hate to say, at the professional level through a type of threats and intimidation that if you don't go along with this, your job is at stake. Your career is at stake. In other words, your entire livelihood is at stake. So you have that. That's a hard argument to push back. But if you know how academia really works, then it makes sense why so many people who go along with the evolutionary explanation, why they do so. The second question, which I think is hard for people to understand, is why is it that creatures can look so similar at times? Why do humans look like chimpanzees? And why are we closer to chimpanzees than we are to dogs? And why do dogs look a little closer to us than, a sponge does? And so there seems to be this hierarchy that you have simple life, which advances to a little more complex life, And as you get closer and closer to human beings, that's why chimps and apes and things look closer to us on that. And it seems to indicate there was some kind of evolution over a long period of time. But the fact of the matter is that organisms look similar to each other because we have similar functions and we have to do similar things on this planet. And what you really need to explain is not the similarities, but you need to explain the origins of the systems, these incredibly complex systems, which enable us to turn food. You eat a piece of bread, you turn that into energy. how do you explain the origin of metabolism? We face different challenges. We adapt. How do you explain the origin of adaptation? We reproduce over time and we grow. These are incredibly complex systems made up of other complex systems. That's really what you need to explain the origins of, is how do you get all these systems together? And once you recognize how complex they are, and once you recognize that all organisms need to do similar things in many ways on this planet, then you'll see a common design to explain the similarities of these systems and parts.
And it would also make sense that with a God of the level genius that he is, that there could be much shared in DNA. You don't need 10 trillion different models. You have a certain system and then you vary it to get these incredibly diverse results. Randy, have you seen over the years people come to ICR.org that are struggling? Maybe they've lost their faith or they're on the edge of losing their faith. And when they just get facts and information, now that they become convinced again that God and his word are trustworthy?
Yes. Your phrase that this is a lifeline is so accurate, because they are on the verge of losing faith and they're doubting, and it's really a traumatic situation for many of these college students, that they're wondering if everything they've been taught in church and by their parents is all wrong, and if they're being pounded incessantly through all these different avenues at school, particularly at college, and they are on the verge. And reality is there's good answers to the things they're being told. We can throw them that lifeline, and when they do get some solid scientific answers, not only do they regain their faith, but if they really listen carefully, they find out how foolish the things that are being taught in school really are.
Mm. And, Randy, I'm familiar with this in the areas where I've specialized in apologetics, where someone is struggling and ready to lose their faith. And then they get our materials and suddenly the relief is there. And I've been through it in my own life, when I was studying and being challenged early on and having to come up with these answers. But I have very little scientific background, so I know the questions to ask. I can do a great apologetics presentation on a certain level, but the moment you challenge it, I can't answer because I don't have the background. But I'm okay with that because I know that you're out there and websites like yours are there. In other words, everyone watching and listening, you don't necessarily have to master every subject. You just have to know that there are experts, solid, intellectually sound, well-educated, who've done the homework, and they have answers scientifically, philosophically, theologically. And then you just need to know where to go for these resources. So, Randy, thanks not just for the work you're doing, but for making it available to so many people through the website, ICR.org. We'll have to have you back on and get into some things in greater depth. But thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're more than welcome. Thanks for the great discussion.